So, Regina, it's all yours. You have the
All right.
floor.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And I just want to give I guess, a shout out to Mina. She's really encouraged me a great deal in this. And I probably would not have volunteered to teach if it had been for her continual encouragement. And I would like to what I want to talk about tonight is the power of words and how important words are in our lives. When I was talking to a friend of mine, a brother who's in our fellowship, and I told him that I was going to be teaching on a video conference on Thursday night, and he asked, "Oh, what are you teaching about?" And when I told him, he just kind of rolled his eyes. And I just thought, man, this is something that is just so important. You can never hear too much, be reminded too often about how important words are in our lives. They're just so easily spoken. They roll out of our mouths so easily, and yet they have such an impact and such power. Words unleash spiritual power into the physical realm, and people are always looking for that. How do I get that? Well, it's through the words that you speak. When in Genesis chapter 1, we all saw how we've read how it was just by speaking that God spoke the world into existence. He's brought light forth from darkness, and he set order back into place out of chaos. And in looking in 1 Kings, there's a record in 1 Kings that can show how powerful words are. In give me a second here because I'm still getting used to using my phone to find the REV. So 1 Kings 18, in starting, oh boy, I'm just going to have to I'm going to look in a written Bible just because it's easier for me. And you can look in the REV, but I'm actually going to be reading from the Amplified Bible. 1 Kings 18, verse 36. We see how Elijah, with just his words, well, not just, but with his words, he called down fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. And in verse 36 of 1 Kings 18, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you, the Lord, are God, and have turned their hearts back to you." And then the fire of God fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust, and also licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Just with his words, Elijah was able to do this. And of course, he absolutely believed every word that he said. But it was just, he was able to bring forth spiritual power into the physical realm with his words. In John, the Gospel of John, chapter 11, Jesus Christ, with his word, was able to bring Lazarus back to life. In verse 41 of John chapter 11, so they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. Yes, I know you always hear and listen to me, but I have said this on account of and for the benefit of the people standing around, so that they may believe that you did send me and that you made me your messenger. When he had said this, he shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And out walked the man who had been dead, his feet and hands wrapped in burial clothes and with the burial napkin bound around his face. With his word, he was able to bring a dead man back to life. And we're able to do the same thing with words, because that's what brings the spiritual power into the physical world. And of course, we know in Romans chapter 10, verse 9 and 10, just by confessing Jesus Christ is Lord, it's with your mouth that you're able to acquire everlasting life. Something that everyone wants, but so few know how. And we have the privilege of letting them know how. With their words, they acquire everlasting life. In James chapter 3, this is just such a, this is probably the first record that that really spoke to me about the power of words and how important they are. And in James chapter 3, in verse 2, for we all often stumble and fall and offend in many things. Boy. And if anyone does not offend in speech and never says wrong things, he is fully developed of character and of a perfect man, able to control his whole body and curb his entire nature. We set bits in horses' mouths and make them obey us. We turn their whole bodies about. Likewise, look at the ships, though they are so great and are driven by rough winds and are steered by very small rudders, wherever the impulse of the helmsman determines. Even so, the tongue is a little member, and it can boast of great things. See how much wood and how great a forest a tiny spark can set ablaze. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is a world of wickedness set out among our members, contaminating and depraving the whole body, and setting on fire the wheel of birth, the cycle of man's nature, being itself ignited by Gehenna. Every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea animal can be tamed and has been tamed by human nature, but the human tongue can be tamed by no man. It can't, it's the human tongue can be tamed by no man, but knowing how powerful that is, that can make one hesitant to speak at all, especially when you consider Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 in verse 34. It says that These things all taken together, Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, without a parable, he said nothing to them. And I'm looking in chapter 13, sorry. Matthew 12, verse 34. You offspring of vipers, how can you speak good things when you're evil or wicked? For out of the fullness and the overflow, the superabundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. The good man from his inner treasure flings forth good things, and the evil man out of his inner evil storehouse flings forth evil things. But I tell you, on the day of judgment, men will have to give account for every idle, inoperative, non-working word that they speak. And when you consider that, every single word you speak, you are accountable for, whether you bring forth life or you bring forth death by the words you speak. And yet, the Bible recognizes that the tongue no one can tame. So what do? Well, the thought would be, well, gosh, maybe I just won't want to say anything at all. But we know from life, and even in Ecclesiastes, it teaches, to everything there is a season. There is a time to speak and a time to remain silent. God obviously gave us mouths to speak with. In 2 Corinthians, in chapter 5 and verse 20, it says that we grow up by speaking the truth. So if we're never speaking, we're not going to be growing up. That's in Ephesians 4:15. But we also know that in 2 Corinthians 5:20 that we are ambassadors for Christ. We can't be ambassadors, we can't be faithful ambassadors if we never speak up. So of course we do need to speak up, and we need to speak the truth. We have been committed with the word of reconciliation. So the word of reconciliation is not going to get out to the world unless we open our mouths and speak it forth. We must speak. So knowing this awesome privilege and equally awesome responsibility, how do we ensure that what we speak are words of life and not words that bring destruction? Well, the answer, of course, is to look to God, to turn your eyes upon Jesus, to always allow him to work through you. It's not us by our own power that will control our tongue. Obviously, we do have to use our own minds and our brains, but it's not human power. It's the power of God that will enable us to speak words of life. In Psalm 19, verse 14, it says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Yahweh, my rock and my redeemer." It's we ask for God's help. Psalm 141, verse 3, "O Yahweh, set a guard on my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips." Of course, yes, I engage my brain and I think it through, but Lord, I need your help. This is not something that I, by my own power, will be doing. I love there's a bumper sticker that I don't know if you all have seen it, but I love it. It says, say what's true, even if your voice shakes. You can speak up and you can speak the truth. It doesn't really matter what emotions are going on in your life and your heart. You can say what's true. In Philippians 4, verse 4, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. And I think again, to me, every time I hear that, I hear the song, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And I just love to hear that. I hear the round, I just hear people singing, and it just makes me smile. It just, how can you not remain positive when you have that in your mind? In Psalm 100, it talks about coming before his presence with singing, and always to be thankful to him. And I think how thankful we are to God, no matter the circumstances, no matter what's going on around us. And by your example, others learn from that. There's just a lot of power within that. Colossians 3, I'm going to read that. In verse 16, let the word spoken by Christ the Messiah have its home in your hearts and minds and dwell in you in all its richness, as you teach and admonish and train one another in all insight and intelligence and wisdom in spiritual things. And as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, making melody to God with his grace in your hearts. So as we look to God to be the source of our strength and to set a guard before our lips, then we can have boldness to speak and to know that, yeah, we're not of our own strength going to tame our tongue, and we're not always going to be perfect in everything that we say, but we do have committed to us a ministry which we cannot carry out unless we do open our mouths and speak freely. So I would close by turning to 2 Corinthians chapter 2 in verse 14. But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumph as trophies of Christ's victory, and through us spreads and makes evidence the fragrance of the knowledge of God everywhere. It's God always makes known his knowledge by the words that we speak, and it's a sweet fragrance. And so, yes, it is an awesome privilege to be able to speak, and it's an awesome responsibility knowing that you're bringing, when you speak, you are bringing spiritual power into the physical realm, but you can believe God to work within you so that the things that you speak are the right things and inspired by God. And I know this was short, but that's what I have for you.